Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In a silent courtroom, Judge Harrison, known for his arrogant attitude and prejudice, stares at Marcus Johnson, a black lawyer with a reputation for impeccable service. The tension is palpable. "You shouldn't even be here," Judge Harrison said, his voice cold and full of contempt. "Some men like you have no business being in this courtroom." Marcus clenches his fists under the table, breathing deeply to keep from retorting. He knows any reaction could be used against him. The audience holds their breath, shocked by the blatant insult in a place supposed to symbolize justice. 7 minutes later, as Marcus finishes a brilliant presentation on the current case, 2 officers abruptly enter the room. "Marcus Johnson, you are under arrest," one of them announced, without providing an immediate reason. The court is stunned. Some murmur, others remain silent, stunned. Marcus, calm but determined, immediately understands that this is an abuse of power. The judge orchestrated this arrest to publicly humiliate and crush him. But Marcus is not just anyone. He knows this moment will not be his downfall, but the beginning of a fight back that will expose the injustice of this racist system. The courtroom was bathed in cold light, filtering through the large windows. Every glance seemed to weigh on Marcus Johnson like an invisible judgment. He watched Judge Harrison, a graying-haired man with a hard face and hard eyes, sitting behind his imposing desk. "You don't belong here," Harrison said, his voice echoing in the room. "Some men like you shouldn't even be allowed through the doors of this courthouse." An icy silence fell over the room. The murmurs died down immediately. Marcus felt anger rising, but he suppressed it. He had known this game for too long to fall into the trap of an impulsive reaction. He stood straight, his gaze fixed on the judge, and replied in a calm but firm voice. "Your Honor, I am here to defend justice, not to suffer your prejudices." Harrison frowned, surprised by Marcus's audacity. "Justice," he sneered. "Justice for people like you is an illusion." Marcus jotted down every word in his mind, aware that all of this could be used against the judge later. He finished his presentation with precision and elegance, demonstrating the blatant injustice of the case. The room was captivated, and some of the jurors exchanged worried glances. As he was putting down his notes, 2 officers suddenly entered the room. The sound of their boots made several spectators jump. "Marcus Johnson, you are under arrest," one of the officers announced, without providing an explanation. Marcus's breath came out slowly and evenly. He knew this arrest wasn't legal, but purely motivated by racism and the judge's arrogance. In the eyes of the spectators, he read a mixture of shock and fear. At that precise moment, Marcus understood that this moment was not a humiliation, but the trigger for a fight for truth and justice, a fight that would bring down a man who believed himself above the law. Marcus was escorted from the courtroom, handcuffs tightened around his wrists. Each step echoed the injustice that had just taken place. The murmurs in the courtroom faded behind him, but in his mind, a single thought consumed him: this isn't over. In the police car, Marcus watched the 2 officers. Their demeanor was arrogant, convinced they had performed an act of might. But they didn't know the man they were transporting. Marcus had spent years facing far more difficult situations. Fear had never been an option. "You should be grateful we're teaching you this lesson," one of the policemen said, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. Marcus replied calmly, "The only lesson here is that you cannot take justice into your own hands. And every act you do unjustly will be counted." When they arrived at the station, Marcus was placed in a cell. The cold walls and the clicking of the door reinforced the sense of isolation. But behind his eyes, a plan was forming. He knew he had to act quickly to protect himself and expose Harrison's corruption. On his first call, Marcus contacted his legal mentor, a respected man in the state, and explained the situation in detail. The mentor immediately understood the scope of the problem: a racist judge using his power to punish a black lawyer who dared to challenge him. As Marcus waited, strategic thoughts raced through his mind. He knew the key lay in documentation and speed: videos, witness statements, anything that could prove this arrest was a setup. 7 minutes had been enough for the judge to launch a direct attack. Marcus, however, knew that time would be on his side if every action was calculated. Injustice had struck, but he was ready to strike back, methodically, giving Harrison no chance to hide his crimes. No sooner had Marcus been released on bail than his plan began to unfold. The legal mentor he had contacted had mobilized his network of lawyers and journalists ready to expose any abuse of power. News of the arbitrary arrest had already begun circulating on social media, sparking outrage and debate across the state. Marcus entered his office, his face calm but his eyes burning with determination. His team immediately began gathering evidence, courtroom video recordings, witness accounts, police recordings, anything that could document Judge Harrison's bias. "The judge thought he could break me in 7 minutes, Marcus whispered. "He's going to find out he's woken up a storm." Meanwhile, Harrison, in his office, was furious. His plan had failed. Instead of humiliating Marcus, he had just created a public scandal. His fellow judges murmured among themselves, worried about the repercussions, but none dared to intervene openly. Marcus, meanwhile, was preparing a motion seeking Harrison's immediate suspension, citing biased and racist behavior, as well as attempted wrongful arrest. Every word was carefully weighed, every argument firmly supported by facts and irrefutable evidence. The decisive moment was approaching. Marcus knew that this was no longer just about his own dignity, but a message for all those who suffered similar injustices: no power is above justice. In the shadows, Harrison prepared to strike back, believing his influence could still control everything. But Marcus had an advantage the judge lacked: documented truth and public support. The conflict was only just beginning, and soon the entire court would tremble. The day of Judge Harrison's disciplinary hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, lawyers, and citizens had come to support Marcus and follow this historic case. The atmosphere was electric. Marcus entered, immaculate in his dark suit, his gaze calm and determined. Harrison, sitting behind his desk, stared at him with a mixture of anger and fear, realizing that the situation was getting out of hand. Marcus's mentor spoke. "Your Honor, we are here to review Judge Harrison's unacceptable behavior. His racist remarks and abusive actions against attorney Marcus Johnson are not only an affront to the individual, but to the entire justice system." Marcus presented his evidence with surgical precision: videos of the insult, witness accounts from bystanders, reports documenting the wrongful arrest. Every detail was meticulously timed, demonstrating that Harrison had acted premeditatedly and biasedly. A murmur rippled through the room. Harrison tried to retort, but every argument was immediately contradicted by the material presented. The audience and reporters took notes, aware that the judge's power was crumbling before their eyes. Marcus, serene, concludes. 7 minutes were enough for this judge to try to destroy me. 7 minutes will be enough for justice to re-establish the truth. The court took a moment to deliberate. The heavy silence underscored the historic significance of this hearing. Harrison, for the first time, seemed vulnerable. He had lost control, and Marcus, thanks to his preparation and composure, had gained the upper hand. The final decision was imminent, but one thing was clear: Marcus had turned the judge's arrogance and hatred against himself. What had begun as a public humiliation was now becoming a triumph of justice. The court resumed its session to announce the decision. The silence was total, hanging like a pall over the room. Harrison was pale, unable to mask the growing anxiety within him. Marcus, however, stood straight, every movement measured, every look assured. The chairman of the disciplinary council spoke. After reviewing all the evidence and hearing testimony, this council finds that Judge Harrison flagrantly violated judicial ethics and committed an abuse of power motivated by racial bias. A murmur of approval went through the room. Harrison tried to protest, but the president continued. Accordingly, Judge Harrison is suspended from office immediately, and a criminal investigation is being initiated into the wrongful arrest of attorney Marcus Johnson. Harrison was stunned. For the first time, he was helpless in the face of the consequences of his own actions. The audience erupted in murmurs of admiration for Marcus, who had managed to turn a personal attack into a historic victory. Marcus, in a calm but firm voice, declared to the room. Justice is not a privilege reserved for a few. It belongs to everyone. This is not just my victory, but that of every person facing injustice. Harrison was escorted from the courtroom, silent and ashamed. Marcus left the room to quiet but sincere applause from most of the witnesses and reporters. This moment marked not only the end of a corrupt judge, but the beginning of an era in which truth and integrity triumphed over arrogance and hatred. Marcus knew the battle was won, but he was already preparing for the challenges ahead, aware that vigilance in the face of injustice must never waver. After Harrison's fall, Marcus quickly became a household name across the state and beyond. The media picked up on the story, a black lawyer, targeted by a racist judge, who had not only survived injustice, but turned it against the perpetrators. Marcus understood that his personal victory could become a tool for changing minds. He began giving lectures, meeting with civil rights organizations, and supporting victims of abuse of power. Every word he spoke, every gesture, was measured and full of hope. Fear is the weapon of those who think power belongs to them, he often said. But truth and justice are stronger than any fear. In the weeks that followed, Marcus was asked to participate in panels, broadcasts, and public discussions. But he remained true to his goal, not to allow himself to be transformed into a mere media figure, but to use that influence to protect those who had no voice. Judge Harrison, meanwhile, now faced judicial investigations and the complete loss of his credibility. His arrogance had been his downfall. Marcus, however, continued to work with his colleagues to create training programs for judges and lawyers to prevent such injustices from happening again. Every night, Marcus thought back to that initial moment in the courtroom, the 7 minutes that changed everything. But now, he saw those 7 minutes not as a humiliation, but as the trigger for a fight for justice that transcended his own history. And while the town was still talking about this matter, Marcus understood an essential truth: justice, when courageously defended, can transform even the darkest injustices into light for all. A few months after his historic victory, Marcus thought he could breathe a little easier. But injustice, like a lingering shadow, had a way of lurking where you least expected it. One morning, upon arriving at his office, Marcus found an anonymous letter slipped under his door. He opened it cautiously. Inside, a brief, ominous message. This isn't over. The same forces you fought are preparing to strike again. Be ready. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Even with Harrison out of the running, he knew that corrupt allies of the judge, still present in the judicial and police systems, might attempt revenge. The lesson of the 7 minutes was clear: you can never let your guard down against those who have abused power. Without wasting any time, Marcus mobilized his team to identify the origin of the message. He also contacted his network of lawyers and journalists to stay informed and prevent any manipulation or attempts at intimidation. In the days that followed, small threats began to appear: anonymous calls, rumors spread in certain legal circles, attempts to discredit him in the local press. But Marcus did not weaken. Every threat was analyzed, every risk assessed. He remembered the 7 minutes in the courtroom and knew that vigilance was his best weapon. At the same time, he continued his public work, appearing as a symbol of courage and justice. But now, a part of his mind remained ever alert, aware that the real battle never ended with a simple legal victory. And while the city admired Marcus for his past victory, he knew that a new, more subtle and more dangerous test was brewing in the shadow of the courts. The initial 7 minutes had only been the beginning. A few weeks after the anonymous threats, Marcus felt the danger was becoming real. Irregularities were appearing in some court cases, decisions were being strangely manipulated, evidence was disappearing, and some colleagues suddenly seemed hostile toward him. One evening, on his way home, Marcus received a cryptic call. "Marcus Johnson, you think you've won, but you don't know all the players." The voice was distorted, but the message was clear: a plot was brewing, and Harrison was just one pawn among many. Without wasting a second, Marcus mobilized his team to investigate. Using contacts in the honest police force and informants in the justice system, he began to piece together the pieces of a complex puzzle. Several corrupt judges and officers were planning to manipulate cases to discredit Marcus and force him out of the profession. He knew he had to act before they could. Marcus held a strategy meeting with his mentor and his most trusted colleagues. Together, they developed a plan to publicly expose the conspiracy while protecting the victims and minimizing the risk to Marcus himself. On the day of the confrontation, Marcus presented the evidence to an independent committee, with journalists and witnesses present. Every document, every recording, every testimony was meticulously displayed. The accomplices in the plot, surprised and unable to respond, were immediately suspended and their involvement in the corruption exposed. Marcus, looking around the room, said calmly, "Justice is not just a fight for oneself, but for every oppressed voice. Those who attempt to manipulate the system must never think they are untouchable." This victory was not just personal, it showed that even the most well-organized conspiracies could be thwarted by perseverance, intelligence, and vigilance. Marcus understood that the fight against injustice would be constant, but he felt ready to face any storms that came. After foiling the plot, Marcus realized that victory alone was not enough. Injustice would not disappear until the system was permanently transformed. He then decided to use his fame and experience to promote judicial reform. Marcus launched a series of initiatives to protect lawyers, victims, and all those facing abuses of power. He organized training workshops for young lawyers on ethics, rigorous documentation, and resisting corrupt pressures. Each workshop was a practical lesson in vigilance and courage in the face of injustice. He also worked with NGOs and civil rights groups to create a monitoring program for judges and court officials, aimed at detecting bias or abuse before it could cause damage. The press followed his every move, but Marcus made sure his message remained focused on justice and not his own glory. "Each individual victory is fragile," he said. "But together, we can create a system where truth and fairness become the norm." Even the now disgraced Harrison became a public example. His arrogance and racism, exposed, now served as a lesson to other judges and officials. Marcus felt that, for the first time, his fight was no longer just a personal struggle against injustice, but a project capable of transforming the system. The 7 minutes in the courtroom, once a symbol of humiliation, had become the catalyst for profound and lasting change. While the media hailed Marcus as a hero, he remained humble. For him, the real victory wasn't public recognition, but protecting those who had no voice and creating a fairer system for future generations. The day Marcus was invited to speak before the State Assembly of Lawyers and Judges, the tension was palpable. Many remembered the fateful 7 minutes when a racist judge had tried to humiliate and break him. Today, it was Marcus who embodied strength and justice. He stepped onto the platform, looking at the assembly. His gaze lingered for a moment on the attentive faces, some hesitant, others admiring. Then, in a clear and firm voice, he began. "A few months ago, I was insulted, humiliated, and arrested for no reason, simply because I am black. What I experienced could have broken me. But I chose to turn those 7 minutes of shame into 7 minutes of courage." A respectful silence fell. Marcus continued. "Justice isn't just about following the law. It's about protecting those who don't have a voice, calling out those who abuse their power, and making the system work for everyone. And that's what we must do, every day, without exception." At the end of his speech, the room erupted in applause. The media covered the event, but Marcus wasn't seeking glory. He wanted this moment to become a symbol, a call to action for all those who faced injustice. In the weeks that followed, new laws were proposed to ensure greater transparency in the justice system. The programs initiated by Marcus began to bear fruit, abuses were detected and corrected, corrupt careers were ended, and many victims finally found justice. Marcus, however, continued his work with humility and determination. He knew that the fight against injustice never ended, but he had proven one thing: even in the face of arrogance, racism, and corruption, truth could triumph. And as he left the courtroom, Marcus remembered those initial 7 minutes, the tension, the fear, and the anger. Today, they were no longer a painful memory, but a symbol of a resounding victory for justice over hatred. Justice had won. Marcus had won. And the system would never be the same again.